Artificial intelligence is a term coming into increasingly greater use as the capacities of technological computer science grow and expand. Artificial intelligence essentially refers to any human-like behavior by a computer or other machine. Using extensive databases, computers can be programmed to mimic human actions, such as drawing a picture of something from a spoken word or text. The implications for this technology are vast. Whether it's science fiction come to real life, or something more mundane like playing a game of chess or checkers, or functional applications in law, finance, manufacturing, or healthcare, to note a few examples, AI, as it's often referred to, is poised to make a big leap into our daily lives. In many ways, it already has. For instance, when you ask your phone a question using Siri, you're using artificial intelligence. 3 years ago, a panel of experts and individuals concerned about managing the growth of AI responsibly met in Manchester at the Park House at the Rec Park to discuss the possibilities of AI. One of them was Representative Brian Cena of Burlington. We caught up with him again recently to hear how he's seeing the changes since 2019, when he was on the state panel examining the role and possibilities of AI and had introduced some legislative bills for deliberation in the State House.
There were two AI bills in the Energy and Technology Committee that had come in, and on the floor of the House we were debating the use of facial recognition technology by investigators in sexual abuse cases for children, because the year before Vermont had banned the use of facial recognition by law enforcement. But what we heard from the Attorney General and the state's attorneys was that in certain cases, a massive amount of time was used to look through all these photos that were seized during a search under a warrant, to look for the victim and the offender together. And so they were asking for a special dispensation that in those cases, after there has been a warrant and a legal search, and there's evidence that the state has that it has to go through to move these cases quicker, could we use AI in the first round of searching those photos, and then a human would go through and check them? And we had a big debate on the floor about what is what is an automated decision system, which ones have human oversight and which ones don't, how is data shared, and there were lots of questions that could not be answered. And at that time I said, this is why we need an inventory, because no one can tell us. And that was a compelling moment where there seemed to be this decision made, by the leadership of the Energy and Technology Committee, as well as by a commitment from many members to pick up the issue of AI again. And so in 2021 and 2022, the House Energy and Technology Committee took extensive testimony on the topic, and they took the two bills that I introduced and merged them into one bill. So H410 became the vehicle. It was modified. Some of the recommendations were not followed that were in the task force report, and some things were added. And then the Senate had their way with it and completely changed it. And so where it landed was that the state of Vermont created a division of artificial intelligence housed in the Agency of Digital Services, and creates a position of a director of that division and an advisory council, not a commission, but it's a body that works with that division to create that inventory, but also to look at how can AI be used to increase the efficiency of government, how can AI be used to reduce the harm of the government, how do we use AI in ways that protect human rights, looking at creating a code of ethics, and more. I'd have to look at the bill to, but you could probably do that separate. So that's what happened at the end of last year. So now,
Zooming out from there, I guess I just wondered, what are some of your general thoughts, concerns, or maybe excitement about what some of the possibilities offered by artificial intelligence are? I mean, there's been no shortage of literature I've read which worries about things like security concerns or privacy invasions or surveillance. And then there's also, I suppose, a bigger picture like, well, what happens when we get to the point where machines are doing everything and workers are being displaced? And will some of them be able to find jobs that will and allow them to kind of, maintain a certain standard of living? Do you see that as some kind of possibility that even at this point we should start thinking about and preparing for, or kind of, are we just going to kind of let it all happen the way it happens and deal with it when that time comes?
Yeah, well, in the when the Vermont Artificial Intelligence Task Force was doing our work, we heard extensive testimony about the economic benefits and risks of artificial intelligence. And what we learned was that as artificial intelligence and automation in general, like replace labor that was once provided by humans or animals, that other jobs pop up. So, for example, on a dairy farm, if they're using milking robots, you may not have as many people directly milking animals, but you have new jobs that didn't exist on farms before related to running that machinery, maintaining that machinery, and building that kind of machine. There's like a whole other. So what we learned is that as artificial intelligence is used to reduce sort of the burden on human labor, that it could create new jobs that would take the place of some of the old jobs. But in the long term, if artificial intelligence starts to replace a lot of the jobs people had, then the question is, what does the economy look like? The question is, how do we create opportunities for people to contribute to the world? How do we support the people? How do we, if machines are being used to replace people in the economy, and those machines are allowing people who control the means of production to accumulate wealth, but then there's massive amounts of people who don't have access to means of production, who don't have access to land, who don't have access to capital, how do they support themselves in an economy that's sort of based on a model of you work and you accumulate capital and then you spend it, and there was talk about robot taxes and universal basic income, and the idea that we might redirect some of the profits that are being made off robots to support social services or support other options. But most people don't want to just live on a government check and feel like they're not contributing to the world. The most important thing about work isn't necessarily, although for many of us it's a survival thing, that there's plenty of people who have disabilities who can't work full time, who receive benefits, but they want to work. They want to do something in the world of value. And so perhaps it gives us an opportunity to rethink how we use our labor. And maybe instead of having an economy that's based on a 40-hour work week, we used to have an economy based on a 60, 70, 80-hour work week. Maybe we go to a 20-hour work week model, and we divide the jobs in half, and people share a job, and get paid an amount that in the new economy is equivalent to what they would have gotten paid working 40 hours. It wouldn't hurt society for people to have more leisure time. I think that it would help our physical and mental health. So robots and AI and automation and automated decision systems might allow us to cultivate a society where humans live happier, healthier lives. I do think it's a challenge when you take into account the consciousness of machines, because the moment that the machines become self-aware, I think the ethical question is, do we now have a new form of slave? And how long before a slave that is superior to you decides to revolt? And what would that look like if the entire economy is built on AI that just refuses to cooperate, or even worse, like sort of turns against humans? And so I don't want to go in like that. This is like the doom and gloom side of it. So I think it's important as we move forward to always be looking at the benefits and risks. There's ways that we can set boundaries and limits about the development of AI to prevent that from happening. But we also need to be thinking about what do we do if it happens.
One application which many people might not automatically link with AI is agriculture. High-end technology in plowing fields of vegetables or raising livestock might seem as far apart from each other as anything could be. But that's not the case, said Kurt Blades, a senior vice president of the Association of Equipment Manufacturers, a North American-based trade association representing off-road equipment manufacturers and suppliers.
But I often say that if you haven't been on a farm in the last 10 years, you haven't been on a farm, because they are very different today than they were, not too long ago, because of the technology that's out there. So artificial intelligence, like all of the other technologies and like all other industries, with agriculture, when you think about the level of data that is collected on a farm on an ongoing basis, whether it's tractors, sensors, planters, harvesters, whatever, that data has been collected for about 35 years, as soon as tractors were able to drive themselves. So you think 35 years worth of data, all of a sudden you can apply some artificial intelligence to it. It's amazing what we're just beginning to scratch the surface to try to understand these organic systems that we've never been able to comprehend before. We can now because we have more computing power. So that's where artificial intelligence plays in to agriculture, because it's the data is there, and the data is huge. We've been kind of doing this just through tribal knowledge for centuries. Now we can put some actual quantifiable data and make good decisions to make the most out of the land, to be the most efficient, to be the most sustainable in really amazing ways.
So this would seem to have a very good application for things like weather forecasting or adapting the workload to what the weather's likely to be like, and also soil conditions, I would imagine. They could,
Absolutely.
but it could be like they could analyze the soil and they'll say, well, this is a good year for planting a lot of corn or whatever, or not.
Yeah. Well, I'm from the Midwest. It's always a good year to plant more corn, but you're absolutely right, and that's where we don't know, we haven't known what we haven't known. We've always known as I'm a seventh generation farmer, so we always know that the farm that my family's been farming for over 100 years. We always know that there was this little wet spot, and you have to drive around that, or you have to do something different. But now all of a sudden, you can use data to say, here's actually what's going on in that wet spot. In fact, if we can adjust the seed population, or maybe not even plant that wet spot, all of a sudden the massive yield on that field is better and our costs go down, plus we're reducing the environmental footprint. So you begin to sort of play all those things together, and knowing, kind of that, it's a bad term here, but mass customization. Whereas, if you have a house plant, the ins and outs of that house plant, and you make a prescription based off of that individual house plant because you see it. Well, think of that same thing that you can do as an individual and apply that across an entire field, because you have the data, because you have artificial intelligence. You begin to really think about, almost plant by plant, but certainly foot by foot within the field, what you can do to adjust the nutrients, to adjust the seed population, to address the water that you're putting into it. It makes a huge difference in the production, and again, makes a huge difference on the environmental footprint.
And does it also have an application with machinery, like with tractors and stuff? I mean, I'm assuming
Absolutely.
the potential for like driverless tractors is not that far off.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, that's in farming, the killer app for precision ag was tractors that could drive themselves, and we've been doing that for about 20 years. And farmers immediately were able to pick up on, they may have not got the whole idea of a yield map. They might have not understood exactly what that means from an economic standpoint. But when a farmer looks at a tractor that drives in a straight row and that they don't have to touch the steering wheel as actively, a farmer immediately got that saves me money and that saves me fatigue. I can work longer hours during these tight windows. So that was the killer app that got everybody in. That started with the tractors. You also think that every pass that tractor makes on the field, or the sprayer makes on the field, or the harvester or the planter, That tractor is fundamental in collecting the data. So, I mean, those tractors are pretty sophisticated today. They're collecting data on the land, but they're also collecting a lot of data about the tractor itself. And so you begin to think about, again, a tractor that can drive a straight line, that's easy, and turn and do things somewhat autonomously today, even though it's still got a farmer involved, but it's not a stretch of the imagination at all. Say that at some point that farmer gets removed from that driver's seat from an efficiency standpoint. Well, then you want to let your mind go crazy. Begin to think about what does that mean when how much of the design of equipment today has been to make the equipment more efficient for the farmer. So if you think about the length of a sprayer, 120-foot boom on a sprayer is so you can spray as quick as you can in that window that's needed, because you're trying to cover a whole bunch of acres and you only have so many hours that you can do it. And labor is always a problem. When you remove that labor component, all of a sudden the designs can look very different. And when that tractor drives itself, it might be able to go 24/7. And then you think, if you don't need a 120-foot boom, maybe you can do the same thing with 30-foot. And that makes it lighter. That makes you eligible to use maybe alternative power that you haven't been able to use before because of the weight. So it gets really interesting when you start to let your mind wander of where this industry is going to go in the next 5 to 30 years. It's fascinating stuff, but it's starting right now. That's what's cool about all of this technology, as you say, to markets that couldn't, in the popular psyche, couldn't be further apart. They're actually right there. Farmers are pretty early adopters of this technology and already big users of data right now. Now they're just finding some really practical uses for it that are making a big difference.
So whether it's harvesting corn, milking cows, or turning voice commands into action, artificial intelligence is a coming presence at an accelerating speed. We'll be hearing more and more about it, and not just for chess or checkers. For the GNAT-TV News Project, I'm Andrew McKeever.